Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company. We're taking a look at some guns that they're going to be selling in their February of 2017 regional auction. Before we talk about this one, I just want to set the stage a little bit. It's 1967, so that means James Bond is still being played by Sean Connery. You can go buy yourself a brand new, nice Chevy for $3,200. Billboard hit of the year was Aretha Franklin's Respect. The 911 system does not yet exist. That Chevy that you just bought for $3,200, there is not literally a single jurisdiction in the world that requires you to wear seatbelts. The BBC has not yet begun broadcasting in color. And of course, we haven't landed on the moon yet. The state of mobile phone technology is non-existent because they haven't yet invented the handheld calculator. That's the scene when this specific rifle was manufactured, 1967. I think a lot of people, well, intellectually we know that yes, the AR-15 dates to the Vietnam War, but I think a lot of people don't really think about just how old that is in terms of the technology that we have in our daily lives today. This thing is old. In fact, this thing is specifically 50 years old as of today, this particular one. Colt started making and selling SP1s in 1964, 63 if you want to nitpick, but really 64. And US federal law specifies that any firearm that is 50 years old or older qualifies as a Curio and or Relic. Well, that started including AR-15s just a couple years ago. And by now, in 2017, there's actually like tens of thousands of Colt SP1 rifles that qualify as C&R guns. Let's take a closer look at this one, and I'll show you some of the features of it that you don't normally see in today's modern ARs. So continuing the tradition of many arsenals and gun companies throughout the world and throughout history, Colt opted to make a civilian version of the military M16 rifle that they were producing because, hey, they've got everything tooled up to make it. So if you can make a couple little tweaks and sell it on the open market as well as to the military, why not? Now, basically, the little tweak on the AR-15 was to get rid of the M16's full auto capability. You'll notice here the selector is 2-position only and does not go to full auto, and there are some changes made internally to the gun to prevent it from being easily changed into a full auto M16 type rifle. But beyond that, this was basically the exact same as the standard M16 of the period. In fact, it's interesting that in some ways these are more legitimately retro than actual period M16s, because when the military would make little minor changes to the parts, like little things like changing the exact casting pattern of the front sight assembly, where Colt might have already manufactured a whole bunch of those parts, they needed new parts for the military contract guns, but they were able to take these old parts that were still perfectly usable, and they put them into civilian production. So here's our Colt prancing pony on the side. Caliber is .223, model is SP1, and the serial number on this is SP09088. Now, to put this in proper context, this is a 1967 production gun, and 1968 began with serial number 10,750. So by the very end of 67, there were 10,749 SP1 rifles sold on the commercial market or manufactured for the commercial market, and as of 2017, every single one of those is a Curio and Relic gun. Moving over here, you can see the original manufacturer marks, Colt Patent Firearms, Hartford, Connecticut. Safety selector there, safe and fire. Now if we look at the other side, things get a little bit more complicated because the SP1 never had a forward assist like this. And it also wouldn't have had a chrome-lined bolt carrier except for some of the very, very early guns. However, one of the other indicative features of the SP1 lower is it's what's called a no-fence lower. There's nothing protecting the magazine release button. One of the issues that the military would decide was needed to be changed was that it was a little too easy to bump the button and eject the magazine. So they retrofitted, they changed the design of the lower and added some fencing built up around the magazine release to help prevent things like gear from accidentally depressing the button. But the commercial SP1 lowers never had that. Colt also replaced the front pin with a screw, because, I suppose. Now, what we can tell happened that resulted in this, in fact it is the original early teardrop style of forward assist, is that someone actually put a surplus M16A1 upper on this gun. It's a little hard to see because it's pretty small there, but the front of the barrel is marked SAK MP B, and that indicates that this is a barrel made by Seiko Defense, that it is magnetic particle inspected, and the bore B is chrome lined. So these were actually replacement barrels sold to the US government. That barrel was at some point assembled onto an M16A1 in government property. Someone shot out their bore or otherwise damaged it and it needed to be replaced. That machine gun was then later surplused, its lower receiver destroyed, and the rest of the parts sold as a parts kit. And someone then bought that parts kit and stuck this M16A1 surplus upper onto their SP1 lower, which makes this a pretty good replica of an M16A1 machine gun or a service rifle. A couple other things to mention here. The chrome-lined bolt carrier is a feature that was only used very early. The M16A1s in military production did not have chrome bolt carriers, so whoever had this rifle at some point found one and put it in the gun. While it wouldn't have been in new production M16A1 rifles, the bolt carriers were still floating around, and it wouldn't have been completely out of place to find one in an A1. Now you'll also notice that there are these teeth in the side of the bolt carrier, and those are for use with the forward assist, which allows you to just slowly cam the bolt all the way forward into position. And what's interesting is the SP1 rifles didn't have this forward assist, but they almost always did have bolt carriers with those teeth. The reason for that is the Army decided that it wanted the forward assist as of 1967, so Colt was producing bolt carriers with these cuts. And they didn't cause any problems by being there, so there was no reason for Colt to make a separate toothless version for the civilian production guns. So a lot of people will look at that and say, well, the bolt carrier must be wrong if the bolt carrier has teeth but the receiver doesn't. Well, in fact, that's not the case. They put those bolt carriers in all of the rifles. It's also interesting, I think, to point out that the forward assist is not a particularly necessary feature on an M16 or an AR-15. In fact, the Air Force never did want them, and this is part of the reason that early on you have two different model numbers and designations for Air Force rifles and Army rifles, because the Air Force rifles never had forward assists. It was just the Army that insisted on them. Stoner himself was not a big fan of the concept. The objection to the forward assist is basically that if you are ever in a position where you have to use the forward assist to pound the bolt carrier into battery, you're far more likely to be making your problem worse than to fixing it. And if the bolt carrier doesn't go home on just on the power of the mainspring, you really need to find the root problem that's causing that and fix it, rather than just force the bolt carrier into position. One more interesting element we can actually look at is the buffer. So if I pop the pin on this and break the rifle open, now the mainspring for an AR-15 is in the buttstock, and today we have a spring plunger here that has weights in it, and it acts as a buffer. And what it does is simply add mass to the bolt carrier to delay the opening of the action, to slow it down a little bit. And slowing it down like that helps prevent extraction problems, because it allows the pressure in the chamber to drop a little bit more before the bolt carrier starts moving backward and pulling the case out of the chamber. Some of the very early AR-15s had this very early style of buffer, which has no weights in it at all. It's basically just a large diameter guide rod. This is called an edgewater buffer, and this is one of the things that was replaced to help fix some of the initial problems with the M16 that were actually due to a change in powder composition. So they changed this out, added weights to the buffer, and that helped resolve the kind of famous, legendary, infamous actually, M16 reliability issues at the beginning of the Vietnam War. So pretty cool that this particular rifle has one of these early so-called buffers. That's That's a feature that someone went, I think, to some length to find and install, and it's really neat to have. One other common misconception, a lot of people think that all the Vietnam era ARs or M16s had those early three-prong flash hiders, and that's actually not really the case. The military with the M16A1 standardized on this early birdcage flash hider, which, by the way, the early version has slots all the way around the circumference. The later version would leave the bottom solid and attempt to have less dust signature. But they adopted this birdcage in 1967, so quite a lot of the Vietnam War occurred with this as the standard flash hider. So the Curio and Relic license under US law was developed to give basically old-fashioned firearms collectors a simpler way to transfer guns. They, instead of having to go through the regular background check process, instead they do a background check on you and issue you a federal firearms license, which allows you to receive firearms directly in the mail when you purchase them. It's a really handy kind of license to have, although I will warn you, if you're thinking about getting one, they get really expensive. The license is $30 for 3 years, and then you end up draining your entire bank account buying Curio and Relic firearms because it becomes so convenient. Well, a lot of people with these licenses don't really think about the fact that a lot of our modern firearms are getting to the point where they're old enough that they actually qualify as C&R guns. So this particular one, if you decide to buy it here at Rock Island in this upcoming auction, if you have a Curio and Relic license, ships straight to you instead of going through a separate dealer. So pretty cool. If you're interested in doing that, take a look at the link in the description text below this video. That'll take you to Rock Island's catalog page for this rifle, and you can take a look at their description and pictures and price estimate. And if you decide that you want to place a bid on it, you can do that right through the website as well. Thanks for watching. Pew, pew, pew. Pew, pew. You know, when this rifle was made, Chris Costa hadn't even been born yet.